The fourth precept, as with the third one, has only 4 components. But if you are going to tell a lie, first, what you say, you must know that it's not true. And secondly, you need to have the intention to mislead the listener, also to misunderstand that something which is not true is true, or something which is true is not true. So not only do you know something is untrue, but you mislead the other person to understand it incorrectly as well. So for example, if you said something which at the time you believed was true, but later you found out it wasn't true, then that's not a lie. But it's when you know it's not true for certain and you still insist on misrepresenting it for someone else. Then you need to make the effort to misrepresent the truth. And this might not necessarily be by saying something, but it may be by writing a note, sending an email, even giving a gesture to mislead a person, like shaking your head or waving your hand or whatever. And last but not least, the person who is the target of your lie should actually be misled by what you have said. If they don't believe a word you say, then you have not succeeded in breaking the fourth precept. Or if you try to fool someone who doesn't even understand the language you're speaking, then you are likely to meet with lack of success. And the last one of this series is that to do with the fifth precept, or the precept of drinking alcohol or taking things which cause recklessness. And the first thing is that the liquid should be alcohol. Secondly, you must know it's alcohol and not something else. So if a person drank alcohol by mistake, according to this definition, then it wouldn't break the precept. But I put a star on it because for 8 precepts, even if you don't know it's alcohol but you drink it anyway, you still break the precept, the 5th precept, if it's part of the 8 precepts. Thirdly, you must have the intention to drink it. Fourthly, you make the effort to drink it by putting the glass in your mouth, whatever. And fifthly, it goes down your throat.
So actually people who like to taste wine, if they throw it out,
it doesn't break a precept. It's like mouthwash. Mouthwash. Like that, it would be like using alcohol as a medicine to clean out their mouth. But I'm sure they do swallow it. In fact, for the 8 precepts, they have similar principles too. But I think you can probably conclude for yourself where the measure of a precept lies now. For example, not eating after midday, it must be solid food, and it must really be after midday and before dawn of the next day, and it must go down your throat, and you must have the intention to make the effort. So it's the same principles which we find always for the precepts. Intention, effort. Normally, if you break precepts as a lay person, then you can go to a monk and ask to be given the 5 precepts again, so that you can renew your intention. The precepts are known as rules of training. They're not said to be commandments, so the idea is not that you go around feeling guilty about having broken precepts, but rather that you renew your effort to keep the precepts better next time round. If you don't have a monk available, you can renew the intention to yourself and say Namo Tassa, to take the 3 refuges and repeat 5 precepts to yourself, to make a new contract with yourself to keep the 5 precepts. In the beginning, of course, with all sorts of rules, you will have some mental resistance. It's like you have to fight against something within yourself to succeed in keeping the precepts. If I remember back to the time maybe 20 years ago when I first started to keep 5 precepts, I found it was very hard to stop myself, let's say, exaggerating when talking about things. It's always a temptation to say something is much bigger or more important than it really is. And I had to catch myself. I have to make the effort constantly to say things according to how it really was, for example. So in the beginning there's a conflict between what your habits are and what the precepts are trying to guide you to do. So in this beginning, it's not really self-discipline. It's more like imposed discipline. It's a discipline which you're imposing on yourself. But later, as you practice more, it becomes second nature to behave according to the guidelines of the precepts. And once it becomes second nature, it's at that time you can say it really becomes self-discipline, because you don't need someone to look out for you anymore for the precepts to succeed. And it's really this internalized quality of conscience which we are aiming for. It's not the precepts per se. It's an inner quality which we're trying to develop, but we develop it through the behaviors which we perform. For monks, it's a little bit different. The approach which monks have to discipline, because not all the precepts have the same weight. There are 3 basic categories of rules which monks follow. The most serious of the rules are rules which, if the monk is guilty of them even only once, then he will be thrown out of the monkhood. Things like murder, or stealing, or having sexual relations, or boasting about mental attainments which he has not attained. If a monk is guilty of this, whether anyone knows it or not, he already will no longer be a monk. Less serious than that are 13 rules in the monastic discipline which are frowned upon quite strongly in monks, but not so badly that a monk would be thrown out of the monkhood. But they're seen as serious offenses, but they're ones which a monk can purify himself of if he does certain penance. And the penance which he has to do is that he has to come before a meeting of representatives of the community who will strip him of his rank or his seniority for as long as it takes for him to make up for the wrong things which he has committed. And as I mentioned very early on when I started to meet you for this course, there are things like chatting to ladies alone in a room, or chatting up ladies, or coming in physical contact with ladies, this sort of thing, which are strongly frowned upon, but which a monk can make up for by doing certain penance. Also things like building a big kuti for oneself without asking permission first. There are certain rules like this. Apart from that, the rest of the 227, so the the 210 rules which remain, a monk can purify himself of those transgressions by confessing it to another monk who is not guilty of that transgression. So in theory, the monk has to tell that other monk what he is guilty of, so to make sure that the monk who is receiving the confession didn't know about it, is not also guilty of the same transgression. And this covers all forms of monastic conduct, from the most trivial things like whether you stand up to drink some water, or whether you are fussy about your food, or whether you let your hair grow too long, that sort of thing. But keeping the self-discipline is not the only discipline which monks have. As I said, discipline is something which is fairly external, and it's a good starting point for training your mind. But what we're really aiming for is something deeper than that, and to use discipline to the full extent. Even lay people can learn from the example of monks, because the training doesn't end with 227 rules, it's just the start. And really what we are aiming for in training ourselves according to 227 rules is to gain a higher quality of mind. Some things others can reproach you for if you do it wrong, it's obvious to others. But if you go deeper than that to the way you use your senses, if you are still attached to sensual pleasures, liking to taste tasty foods, liking to see beautiful images, liking to listen to beautiful music, these sort of things, they may not be visible to others, that they could help you or to criticize you if you did something wrong. So you have to be the judge of it yourself. So training yourself in restraint of the senses, not to be attached to things via your senses. This is a deeper training which is built on the foundation of keeping the precepts. Further than that, the monks have to be careful about the way in which they earn their livelihood. You may have heard about samma ajiva, or right livelihood for lay people, to avoid things like selling weapons and selling animals to the abattoir, selling people, selling alcohol, selling poisons. Monks never do any of these things anyway, but there are many things which monks shouldn't do, which sometimes do. Really the way in which a monk should earn their livelihood is by going around with the alms bowl, not by taking jobs on the side, or fortune telling, or giving predictions for the lottery, or being a doctor. These are not the duty of a monk. So by being careful about the way in which you support yourself, so that you are staying clearly within the guidelines set down for a monk. Again, this is a form of self-discipline which monks also use. And last but not least, the training which we use is to use the basic essentials of life, whether it's the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the place we stay, or the medicines which we use to cure our illnesses. We reflect on, before we use these requisites, to make sure that we don't use them in a wasteful way, and we use them in a way which brings the full benefit. So for example, if we eat, then we don't eat too much, we don't eat for enjoyment. Where we eat we remind ourselves that we are eating in order to sustain ourselves, so that we may do as many good deeds as possible in life. For our clothes, of course, we wouldn't wear monastic robes to look beautiful, but we remind ourselves that they are only there for a practical purpose, to keep off the sun or keep out the cold, keep away the mosquitoes, to protect us in other ways. So these are additional trainings which monks use also within the definition of self-discipline.